Good evening, everyone. We apologize.
Good evening.
Thank you. We're a couple minutes behind here. Stepped out of the Finance Committee meeting. Some of you may know that the City of Gary is in budget season, so we're interviewing every department to go through the budget for 2021. It looks like we have about 23 or so people who are on. Just for your information, this session, while we are not live on Facebook, it will be recorded and it will be made available to the general public on the Gary Common Council Facebook page. It will also be made available on the City of Gary Channel 4 TV station, so that those who may not have been able to tune in will have an opportunity to see what we're talking about. I'm delighted that we are able to have this conversation. I know there are very, very, very strong opinions for and against the school referendum, but it's important, regardless of your position on it, to know the facts and to get answers to the questions you have. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion, and so that is one of the reasons why I thought it would be prudent to have this forum, and I'm certainly open to doing an additional forum to follow up on anything we aren't able to cover this evening, but certainly prior to the vote on November 3rd, so that people feel like they've had a chance to get answers. Our format is pretty straightforward. I've asked the emergency manager, Dr. Paige McNulty. She will begin and give a very brief overview of what we're doing in terms of asking the city to vote for this referendum, what's at stake, how are the funds to be used, just a very brief overview. And then I've asked Dr. Vernon Smith, State Representative Vernon Smith, who currently obviously has been a longtime educator within the city, professor of education, sits on the Distress Unit Appeals Board, and has a great insight in terms of what the state is looking to do and why they are asking us, and perhaps I think over 18 cities this year have had referenda, and 16 of those passed around the state. And he's going to give his perspective as a state representative in terms of the referendum. We will then hopefully hear from State Senator Eddie Melton, who's kind of juggling between meetings, to give his perspective as a resident of the 1st District, but also as our state senator, who's done a lot of work in terms of the bills that have come forward, the School Improvement Fund, et cetera, as it relates to the Gary Community School Corporation. And then we will hear from Mrs. Gleneva Dunham, who is the president of the Gary Teachers Union, and hear her perspective as a teacher and as a union representative. Then, of course, the meat of our session will be to take questions. I am asking that any of your questions be put into the chat box. That way we keep this orderly, and we can review everybody can see what is being asked in the chat box, and so we'll ask those questions. We are trying to keep this within an hour. Again, as I indicated, we will do another session in order to get every question asked and answered. So let's begin with Dr. McNulty.
Good evening, Councilman Godwin, and I appreciate you hosting tonight, and it's my pleasure to be able to present this evening on the referendum, as you are aware, that's on the ballot for November 3rd. I want to start off by saying that, as you're aware, this is an operational referendum, because I know that there's been some confusion about that. This is strictly an operational referendum. This referendum is for 8 years only, because there has been some myths swirling around. This is going to go for 15, 20, even 30 years. That's not the case. The referendum is only for 8 years. And in fact, the question on the ballot says that in the first sentence, that this is an 8-year referendum. The referendum will raise $8.9 million a year. And the first $1 million will go to our teachers who haven't had a raise in 12 years. And again, we need to be competitive and be able to recruit and retain teachers, which is key for us to be able to continue to raise the academics within our school district. Additional dollars from this operational referendum will go directly to improving our academics and certifying 3 of our schools to become STEM certified schools, adding more after-school activities, fine arts programs, getting new curriculum that is desperately needed, adding such things as a science Olympiad, spell bowl, etc. There were 18 referendums that were passed, that were on the last ballot, and 16 of them passed. The states has forced schools to run referendums, and they must do that to help fund themselves going forward. This money helps free up cash in our operational fund to allow us to start balancing our budget, to continue balancing our budget. And we must have a balanced budget for 2 years so that the corporation can go back to local control. I want to explain that there is another pot of money, as mentioned, and that's House Bill 1065 that Eddie Melton helped author. And that is separate funding for us to be able to do capital projects, because as we know, we want to continue to make West Side a state-of-the-art high school for our students and staff to be very proud of. And that helps us with deferred debt payments that we'll be receiving for the next 5 years. And that money is $479,000 a month, again, for the next 5 years. And we're going to be using that money for such things as the roof repairs that are needed for deferred maintenance, HVAC, chillers, painting, which has already begun, track repairs, football field enhancements, fixing the pool, and things like that, that we need to have at all of our buildings so that the students have a place that they can be proud of, as well as the staff. We do have a plan that we have posted on our website, and that's called the Path Forward Plan. And that plan talks about the 4 pillars that we're concentrating on. And again, that's operations, fiscal, finance and engagement, academics and engagement. So I welcome you to look at the plan Path Forward. It is an overarching plan that we will start populating over the next several months with our baseline data that we've been collecting as far as testing with students. And our goal is that every quarter we will be presenting to the community, to City Council, and to all the stakeholders how we're progressing. Because as I've mentioned, much like the students, we want to be held accountable. We think we should be held accountable. And so we have presented we feel a very robust plan that we will continue to have benchmarks and metrics for. So we will continue to ask for input. We did ask for input when we put the Path Forward plan together, and that will continue to be a fluid document. Additionally, we are committed to having a referendum oversight committee, and we are going to be developing an MOU for that. And again, that referendum oversight committee will be made up of stakeholders from the community and pastors, city council people, whomever would like to be on it, so that we can be transparent on how the dollars are being spent and the progress that is being made on these efforts that I just mentioned. And lastly, I just would like to mention that we have included 2 tax calculators on the website, one regular tax calculator that was provided by DLGF, and a separate one strictly for the seniors, because most of the seniors, when they go on there, they can see after they plug in their assessment for anyone who's 65 years or older, their increase is minimal to nothing. So I want to make sure that people are aware of that. And then I want to end with saying that I did research today, and I want to read this. It's from the Indiana Department of Local Government Finance. It says public schools are losing about $268 million in revenue this year, 2019, as a result of caps. That's over 1/10 of their total levy, the amount of property tax revenue the districts would have otherwise been able to raise. The impact of the caps varies widely, with big losses for some large schools and urban school districts. $18.3 million for Indianapolis public school districts they will lose, $17.7 million for the Gary community schools, and $12.3 million for Fort Wayne. Gary schools are losing about half of their potential local property tax levy. When it comes to the lost revenue per pupil, the biggest losers include Gary Community Schools, which is $3,535 per kid, and then Muncie Community Schools and Beech Grove. Gary Community Schools lost $3,535 per student. This referendum would generate $1,978 per student. Therefore, the referendum is asking for 56% of what is being lost. So I thought that was prudent for me to be able to show you what's been lost and why we're needing the additional funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McNulty. What I'd like to do is just note that the two-year plan is in the chat box for anyone who would like to see it. I would also ask that Dr. McNulty, if she can, to post in the chat box the data you mentioned from the Department of Local Government Finance. We do have a couple questions here, and then we'll let you answer those, and then we'll move to State Representative Smith. First question, and I probably can connect them, is why is Gary's request double the request of all the other referendums? And I'll just combine it with, why doesn't the calculator, the tax calculator that you mentioned, show the percent increase? Is it possible to include so that people could actually see that they are paying 20, 22, 30%, et cetera, or more? I think what the question is getting at is that as your property value increases, there's a higher percent increase that you will pay. I mean, obviously you can see the bottom line number of what it is, but knowing what the actual percent is.
So
I'll let you respond.
Thank you. So for the first question, it says, why is it double the request of all other referendums? I assume they're referring to the past two referendums that they tried to pass. Is that what you're referring to?
I think she is referring to perhaps other school districts within the state of Indiana. I know South Bend's was 255 million, but I don't know how that relates to the actual tax increase in the residents.
Yeah, excuse me. Our referendum is actually a very low referendum in comparison to all the other referendums that were passed in the last session that just went through. If you look, for example, at Hammond, our neighboring district, and again, Munster and our neighboring districts, we're a very, very low ask compared to the rest of them. But I can certainly get the 18 that were just on the ballot, 16 of them passed, and get the dollar amount that they were asking for. But I do know that ours is a very low ask.
So I would just ask that you provide that data, maybe in a table, to just show comparatively what the tax ask is here versus other places, and what the total amount in the millions is that is being requested from our school district as it relates to others. We might also account for the differences in enrollment. I know that's one of the questions that has come up. We have roughly 4,500 students. Obviously, some other districts are larger. We probably have some deficits due to our assessed valuation and property tax collection, which play into that as well. A senior says here that her increase on her home is $500 per year. That is not a small increase. We don't know what the value of the home is, but I will say that Dr. McNulty and her team can work with anyone who wants to take a look at the calculator and make sure that they're putting the proper senior exemption button in there. But again, we do know that if your home is worth more than $250,000 in terms of assessed valuation, that it is a greater impact than the average home in Gary, which is between $60,000 to $80,000 in assessed valuation.
That is correct.
Okay, and they're saying their investment property is $800 per home, which will be passed on to the tenants. So they're just noting that this is a big ask for them, and we certainly respect that. And everyone has to make a decision about whether they are willing to vote yes or no in terms of the economic impact it will have on them versus the economic demands of having a more fiscally solvent school system. So that's a choice that each voter will have to make. Okay, at this point, we will have State Representative Vernon Smith.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Godwin, let me first of all thank you for providing this forum so we can help to inform people. As you said, people will have to make a decision as to how they want to vote. What I want to do is try to give some historical perspective to how we got here and why we need this referendum. When I started with the Gary Community School Corporations decades ago, we had over 48,000 kids, youngsters who were part of the student body, and we had 40 schools in Gary. As things has evolved, as Gary has changed, and we've had the exodus of citizens, we're down to the point now where we have 8, 9, 10 schools that are part of the Gary Community School Corporation. So the first problem became the exodus of students, and every student who left, that meant $7,000, $8,000 for loss for the school corporation. So that was the beginning of our problem. And there were superintendents who saw the dwindling student population and tried to downsize the school corporation as far as the number of buildings that were operating to provide an education for our youngsters. And they had resistance from the school board because no one wanted to close a school within their district. And so what they did was get rid of the superintendents who proposed those things because they did not want to face the public in an election with schools being closed in their district. Added to the situation was the movements or the activities of the legislature. So often we want to blame the various school boards that have been in operation in the year past for mismanagement. I am sure there was some mismanagement. We do know of cases of people using credit cards in an improper way. But at the point where we began to deal with this problem in the legislature, as was brought down to us, we were told that we had a debt of $120 billion. And we, of course, were involved with annual deficit spending. Given that situation, if we had $120 million of debt and we had $120 million of mismanagement, there would have been a whole lot of school board members who have been locked up in prison because they would not have stood for, the state of Indiana would not have stood for that level of mismanagement. So we cannot blame the school corporation for mismanagement being the problem. Once again, I share with you the exodus of students, and the exodus of students increased the monies that we were receiving from the state. Added to that, we passed a bill which was in response to the problem here in Gary. We passed a bill that put on tax caps on personal property tax, on property tax. Given that situation, we knew that the need was still there. We were reducing the burden, the levy, the amount that people had to pay, but the need was still there. So what we did was create the referendum process that if you want to spend more money on education, or if you want to spend more money on municipal operation, whatever, then you had to float a referendum. So we initiated the caps, and then we changed the school funding formula. Gary and all the urban school corporations were the beneficiaries of additional monies because of the additional situations that you have in urban settings. Those things are called weights, and you were given additional money for each situation that you had in the form of additional money for weights. Well, we also had in the school formula a process called the de-ghoster, because when you lose a student, or you lose 30 students, they don't all leave out of first grade, out of one classroom in one school. It doesn't happen that way. So we had the de-ghoster principle in place, which allows you to decrease from 8,000 maybe down to 6,000 per student, that you still get those dollars because you still have the responsibility of educating students in a given classroom. So they took out the de-ghoster principle out of the school formula. And they shifted the emphasis not from urban schools, but to suburban schools. And so the rural schools came up the losers, and the urban schools came up the losers. So that didn't help Gary, Indiana at all. So we've got now the caps, we've got the school funding formula being changed, and we got the exodus of students and citizens from our community. So then we come up with all these alternative ways of educating children. Charter schools. Gary has a disproportionate number of charter schools. When you look at our population, we should not have the quantity of charter schools we have. All those dollars that have been placed into private entities, yes, we call them public schools, but they're operated for profit. And those dollars have been funneled to the charter schools. Probably if we had all the students who are student age in the Gary Community School Corporation, we wouldn't be in the situation we are. But the charter schools have added to the situation. And then we came up with the concept of vouchers. Vouchers have taken money from public education and put it into private education. And we have a number of private schools operating right here in Gary, Indiana. So you see the dollars being funneled away from the Gary Community School Corporation, and you wonder why we're in this situation. And then we have the collection rate, which is a problem here. We don't collect all the dollars that we could collect. So that is why Gary Community School Corporation is where it is today. That led, of course, to, as my colleague can tell you, Senator Melton, it led to legislation that created the situation where MGT is here and operating in our school corporation. We went asking for relief, and the relief we got was not what we expected or what we wanted. And so we're in this situation now that we have to consider where we're going to get additional dollars to operate. We must eliminate the annual deficit in order to stop contributing to the overall debt of the school corporation. MGT is not my favorite entity in life, okay? But they have been successful in reducing the debt and reducing the annual deficit for the operation of the schools. And so we have a situation where we've been told by people who are the movers and the shakers that make decisions in Indianapolis that if Gary doesn't help itself with the referendum, that we can't expect any help from the state. And so that's one of the primary reasons why I'm a supporter of the referendum.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Certainly you have the history. You've been here your whole life. You've served on the council and you work currently in Indianapolis, and you know the challenges we face in terms of requesting money, not just for the school corporation, but also for the city. And they are watching how we will respond in terms of our skin in the game. We do have a couple questions, and I will ask some of these later just for the flow of the conversation, but all questions will be asked. It says here that many individuals are concerned by the past lack of accountability by the school corporation. What changes have been implemented across the board for this referendum and potential return to local control that would encourage us to trust that the funding would be well used? So I will turn to Dr. McNulty and then to Representative Smith. I know one thing is that there's state oversight and there's more eyes on the budget and the spending than there has ever been, but Dr. McNulty can respond more broadly.
Yeah, just to echo what Dr. Smith said, we have lots and lots of eyes watching us. So not only DUAB, but the governor's office, and we are actually in the middle of an audit right now. We get audited probably more than any school district there is, and I believe that will continue. Additionally, we have also committed to having many committees starting now and going forward, so that we'll have many people, stakeholders from the community working with us so they can see and help with the oversight, such as I mentioned, the finance committee, an academics committee, a referendum oversight committee. And again, certainly the State Department will continue to be involved at least for the next 2 years. So there's lots of people watching and helping with the oversight, and that will continue.
It also says here, is there any mechanism to limit the number of charter and public schools in a particular city?
May I respond to that? And could I go back to what Dr. McNulty shared with you as well?
Yes, sir.
I want to just underscore that there are many eyes watching what MGT does at the state level. Okay. On our DUAB board, there are the key budget people are members of the DUAB board. And so there's constant scrutiny of what MGT is doing. And so the oversight is there. But also, let me just indicate that MGT has had a problem with transparency and accountability. But we have worked that into the contract that they're operating under now, and they must answer questions or allow people to ask questions and then answer those questions. And then we are working on a memorandum of understanding that will allow an advisory board to oversee and work with MGT in spending the dollars that will be generated by this referendum. So there's going to be more transparency that's part of it. In their budget, in their contract, rather, MGT, they must have these forums that I mentioned and give people, citizens, a chance to ask questions. They must answer those questions, and they must improve in engagement and involving citizens in the process. So those were things that I was able to work with the chairman of the DUET board to get included in their contract. So there is going to be better oversight, more transparency, and more accountability. But let me get to the other question about limiting the number of charter schools. When the first bill passed, it was passed really for the benefit of the IPS system, that's Indianapolis public school system. Most people have fought the charter school system, but the Republicans were able to get charter schools passed into legislation as a pilot. And the trade-off to get the Democrat votes that they needed was that they would return collective bargaining to the Indianapolis Public School Corporation teachers. So that's the history of how we got charter schools. It was supposed to be limited by 25 pilots at that time, and then it began to grow, and they took the cap off of it, and because only Ball State was the only university that was making use of that bill to charter, to authorize charters for these charter schools. Then they came back and created a bill that allowed the state to have a chartering board. Why did they do that? Because when you are a authorizer, if you are giving the charters, you get 3% back. And so the state was saving money by chartering schools. They got 3% back of all that money that was authorized for that school. And so that saved the state money. It wasn't about whether or not the students were being better educated. The question was, can we save money? So we've tried to author bills to put a cap on the charter schools. When the Black Caucus finally met with Ball State and asked Ball State to not authorize any more charter schools, then the state got in the process and started issuing charters. And so, I mean, it's an open floodgate at this point. And I don't see, as long as the Republicans control all segments of government at the state level, anything being done to curtail charter schools.
Thank you, Representative Smith. I want to get one more question in for Dr. McNulty, and then we'll turn to Senator Melton. Dr. McNulty, one gentleman asked, why have the student scores not improved while under this new management system?
Well, actually, the grades when MGT got there were, for the whole district, were F. And so they have steadily gone from F now to a school district grade of a D. So they have increased. I know that D is not good, but they have increased. And Westside is actually the only B high school in the whole community. So although it's not where we want to be, we are making strides in improving that.
Yeah, I want to respectfully disagree with Dr. McNulty on this. At the time the MGT came in control of the school corporation, we had some B schools, we had 2 A schools, and the elementary schools. Our high school wasn't as proficient as it is now, but we had some C schools. We had schools that were performing better than they are now. We have the DUET board has focused on the fact they agree that there's been some slippage in the academic achievement of students. And so we have built into the contract for MGT performance indicators that will determine whether they get paid. I think their contract is maybe, and I may not have exact figures, I should have it before. I think it might be $3.7 million. If they fail to meet the benchmarks that are necessary in academic achievement and parent engagement and so forth, then they'll lose dollars, and they may be down to $2.9 million rather than $3.7 million if they don't perform in those two areas.
Representative Smith, can you post, if you can't do it tonight, if you could send it to me, a copy of that contract so that residents can see what the agreement is between the state of Indiana or DUAB and MGT?
I can send the contract. Dr. McNulty, I imagine it is public information, right? It's public record, right?
I will check.
Okay, I'll need to find that out with DUAB, but if I can, I think it is public record, public information. I will forward it to you as soon as I can. We do have a DUAB meeting on Friday, but I will send a message to Courtney and try to get a determination on that. And I know we were told not to share it prior to our meeting that we had last month or this month, and but I think it's public record at this point.
Thank you. At this time, I want Senator Melton. He's done a lot of work in terms of legislation related to the school corporation, but also he was very present when the whole takeover happened. And I know there was a lot of bills that came forward, which I think were very scary in terms of what their alternatives were, in terms of how Gary students would be educated. I also, if you can, there's been some commentary about, hey, just let the schools go bankrupt. I'm not sure that's a statutory option in the state of Indiana, but if you could talk as well about what the alternatives are if the schools cannot right-size their finances. Thank you, Senator Melton.
All right. Thank you, Councilman, and good evening, everyone. I want to thank Councilman Godwin for hosting this event. I think it's extremely important for us as a community to collectively have these conversations. So I appreciate you. I appreciate my colleague, Representative Smith, and Dr. McNulty, and President Dunham as well. So when I first was elected in 2016 and came into office, it was very clear that we were facing unprecedented times with the Gary Community School Corporation. But one thing I always say downstate, and I want to just frame this as a community, and when we start our conversations, no matter what venue we're in, we got to keep a few things in mind. Number one, we got to keep the children in mind first in our entire decision-making process. And as we move forward, we had to make sure that education is the premier goal at the end of the day in all of our conversations. Then next, we have to make sure that we have a district that is financially solvent and fiscally responsible as we move forward as well. Then ultimately, restoring community pride and trust in the district is extremely important. So I think if we use some of those as guiding conversations, I think we're going to be heading in the right foot as a community collectively when we have dialogues such as this, which is extremely difficult, especially in COVID-19 times when we talk about fiscal decisions for a person's home, fiscal decisions for an entire city and community and a school corporation. So like Councilman Godwin mentioned, when I took office, one of the conversations that took place with the chairman of appropriations when I was sworn in, there literally was a plan and a strategy to disperse Gary students throughout the Northwest Indiana because they had intentions of letting the district fail as a state. They reached out to other community schools in other neighboring cities and towns and asked them if they could take students. And that was a very clear sign that we were reaching a level that I have never seen before, never heard before. But clearly that did not take place. We still have a district intact. In any community in the nation, if you're looking to have a very thriving community, you have to have a solid public school system. And so that's extremely important. And that's one of the things that we're fighting for, to sustain and make sure that we have a public school system that remains intact. So Dr. Smith hit on a few of the numbers. I may be a little redundant when I talk on some of these talking points, but in 2017, the operating deficit that I was aware of was around 8.5 million. And around 2018, it was around $6.7 million. And I'm sure, like Dr. McNulty probably shared, getting those deficits down. In 2017, the overall debt that I was aware of was 101 million. And these are principal and interest on some of the loans that we're taking. So you look at the common school loans that were taken out, but you also have to look at vendors and others that weren't being paid as well. And I'm sure President Dunham will remember there were issues with paying healthcare for teachers, and teachers weren't getting paid on time, and they were not sure if they were going to receive a paycheck every other 2 weeks. So these are the circumstances that we were faced with and that we've seen. When you look at a community like Gary, we look historically at the population loss that we've had since 1970 to 2014. You look at the data, 97,506 residents during that 1970-2014 period. We lost 56% decline population over a significant amount of time. So, and just a reminder of the census, making sure that everyone is counted during the census so we can make sure that the resources that our community needs is going to be important. But Dr. Smith hit on something that's extremely important when we talk about state policies that have contributed to where we are and how we arrived to this very day. Now, of course, there's a responsibility locally from a management perspective, but we can't talk enough about the state policies that have directed us into this current state. One, in 2009, the tax caps that took place. Now, that has helped us as residents, but every taxing entity, every municipal entity in the state of Indiana has seen impacts in this. And I say this as a member of Appropriations Committee. The city of Gary, our public school system, our library systems, everyone is doing more with less. And this is the year where Lake County will see a more direct impact of the property tax cap taking effect. So the Gary School Corporation will see even greater less revenue coming from local tax collection. Dr. Smith hit it on the head. You know, around 2016, 2017, I believe we were at a 40 to 42% collection rate. So all of these things have played a part. The proliferation of charter schools. When I looked at the data from 2009 to 2015, we were losing close to 1,000 students a year. And Gary was ranked 6th in the nation with the most charter schools. So that speaks to that proliferation. And then we all have seen the intentional marketing of other school corporations in other parts of the city, other parts of this region that was directly marketing and recruiting students to come into their communities. So all of this played a role. And as we go downstate and we continue to fight to ensure we have a public school system intact, and no one is thrilled or excited to have a takeover. And we want to make sure that there's a plan in place. And once we have a plan in place to transition back to local control, but make sure that there's a solvency that's going to be intact. And when I look at this referendum and the importance of it, I think it's a decision that every voter will have to make personally. And I'm personally supporting the referendum. As a resident, I'm supporting it in our household, my wife and I. And we know how difficult it is for those that are on a fixed income. We know how difficult it is for those to make the decision that don't have children in the district. And those that feel that the district has failed over the years. But I ask this question: what can we do collectively now, in the future, and moving forward to ensure that our school corporation has a future? But not only that, what can we do to make sure every single child, and this is me talking a little bit more broader now, I apologize, Councilman, if I step out of line, but what can we do to ensure that every single child has access to quality education? period. The state of Indiana is constitutionally obligated to ensure that children receive an education, a public school education. But we as a community have several things to do ourselves. That's holding the districts accountable, be it if emergency manager or local control, but also what are we doing to ensure and support the schools, to ensure and support our teachers. And I'll say this as we prepare to wrap up. When I talked to Dr. McNulty and I talked to those leaders at MGT in regards to where the funds are going, there's a few things that I had to specifically talk to some of my constituents about. And I appreciate you all to talk about transparency and the accountability piece. And later on, Dr. McNulty, you may want to acknowledge that these funds from the referendum is not going directly to the emergency management company. There's a misnomer out there that folks think that MGT will get paid or walk away with the funds that the taxpayers are raising. And I think the transparency of that contract definitely would be helpful to, or elements of that to share with the community. But to give you some ideas of how we can move forward, I think when we looked at the deferment of our payments, and this was language that we fought for this session of 2020 session, was to ensure how can we start investing in these older, antiquated schools where we have HVAC systems that are not working appropriately, where we have an environment where it's not conducive for children to learn. Our children deserve the best, and we as a community need to step forward and do all that we can, be it if we have children in the district or not. So I'm always open to have a conversation. What I'm hoping, and this is the one thing I hate about referendums, and I blame this on as a result of when the tax caps hit, when former Governor Mitch Daniels instituted, took $300 million out of education budget. And during that time frame, the referendums are put intact, and I see it across the entire state. Communities are pit against each other, for or against. Do we want a public school system or not? And I'm seeing it. This is not just a Gary situation. I've seen it in Muncie. I've seen it in other communities across the state, and even those around here in our community. We look at Lake Station that recently had referendums. We look at Lake Ridge that recently had referendums, and it puts communities against each other. And civil discourse should be, and we're not seeing that civil discourse in some instances where there's a difference of opinion. So I want to just encourage folks, if we have a difference of opinion or perspective on how things should be done, let's talk about it. Let's have those conversations and let's figure it out together collectively. But I think now is the time for us to truly come together as a community and figure out what do we want education to look like in the future, and what do we do to make sure that that happens. So again, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Melton. I want to ask two questions quickly, and then of course give our teacher, who we know they're so critical to the education of our children, the Teachers Union president, an opportunity to speak. But just really quickly, there's a conversation happening in the chat about charter schools and where dollars come from. We know that ultimately any dollar that, if a student leaves the school corporation and goes anywhere, charter or private, that per pupil funding obviously will not benefit the school corporation. But one question is, Dr. McNulty, if a student leaves a Gary Community Public School, goes to a charter, and then comes back, does the school corporation get funding from the state with those dollars that left it?
No, unfortunately, the money does not follow the student. So that is the issue. So for example, the first ADM count, which is the time when they take attendance, was last Friday. So if a student was with the charter school, for example, last Friday, and then pulls out of school within the next week or so and comes to us, we don't get those funds. So the money stays with the charter school. The money does not follow the student. And so that happens a lot with public schools because the public schools have a responsibility to service all special ed students and all the related services that go with that. And sometimes that's difficult for the charter schools to be able to manage that. So it's not uncommon, not only for Gary, but all public schools, to have an influx of students that come in after that count day happens. We still have to service them, however.
Mr. Godwin, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I would like to add to that discussion. It has been documented that many of the charter schools are keeping all of those students until the school count day. And then the behavior problems and all the others, then they are told, we're either going to suspend you or expel you, but we won't do that if you go back to to the public schools. And that has been documented. There's been paperwork to show that. That has been in writing by charter schools. And we have suggested several times that if the money is supposed to follow the child, then with the technology we have today, we can do that by month. Every month, we can monitor where the child is and put the money into the school corporation. They don't want to do that. See, my argument is that they're not really concerned about the children of poverty or children of color. It's about money. That's the whole reform situation. It has been about money, not about children, because all these alternative methods, even the state takeovers and all the things that what was done to Roosevelt schools, they have not improved the performance of students. They have not improved instruction in order to increase student learning. And so we need to understand that this is a game that's being played by those who are in control. And we should not stand by and continue to allow it to happen.
Nor do they have the mandates or the accountability that the school district does.
That's right. But if any child who leaves any charter school the public school has to take them.
Let me just quickly, all questions and comments will be through the chat box. But Dr. McNulty, if a charter school student starts out at a charter school and then later goes to if a kid starts in a public school and then switches to charter, it says in the charter would not get the money. Is that correct?
It would not get the money for the first part of the year. If the student is still there in February, they get the money for the second half of the year.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to give Mrs. Dunham an opportunity to speak at this point.
Good evening. My third Zoom of the evening. I think it's the way of life for all of us. So thank you, Councilman Godwin, for having us tonight, and to my co-panelists, good evening, and to the citizens of the First District. So the last Zoom I was on talking about the referendum, somebody said that, I was getting personal. And so I just want to say, as a 43-year teacher in the Gary Community School Corporation, this is very personal to me. And then the next day in the Post-Tribune, I was described as frustrated. And so I am frustrated when I hear citizens, the reason that they give for not supporting the referendum, and sometimes the things that they're saying, the facts are not really there to support what they're saying. So I wrote my comments tonight. So the Gary Community School needs more. Our children deserve more. I'm a product of the Gary schools. I graduated from Gary Lou Wallace, resident of Gary all of my life. Said my son, he graduated from West Side. We've been working at a deficit in this district for a few years now. This is the third time the Gary Community Schools has tried to pass a referendum. As president of the State Federation of AFT, as well as the Gary president, I have 27 locals in my federation, from Hammond to Lake Ridge to Anderson to Martinsville. All of them have passed referendums. The makeup of the state budget is designed for referendums. Do we agree with this? No, we don't agree with this, as teachers know. But on November 19th of last year, 30,000 teachers marched from the State House to demand that the governor and the legislators increase the budget for public education. The public education pot is now being split. It was not large enough from the beginning, and so now we have to share. I've heard a lot of talk about there is plenty of money. Well, we have negotiated for 4 years, and my state staff and myself, we go through the budget. And so if the money was there, we would definitely demand a raise. The money has not been there. prior to the state takeover, there was constant threats, and Senator Melton mentioned that from pay period to pay period, that we would not be getting paid. So I don't know if any of you on this Zoom have experienced such a thing, to put in 2 weeks of work and then you find out that the money is not there for the work that you put in. I don't know if any of you on this Zoom have went 12 years without a raise, and we know what the cost of living is, and we know all of that. And so, you know, consider that when you make your decision about the referendum. The Gary Community Schools will remain stagnant if we don't acquire more revenue. 3 designations have been made for this money. One is raises for the staff. Another one is extracurricular activities. So I just want to give a testimony. So I was a kindergarten teacher for 31 years in Gary. And as a kindergarten teacher, I was known as the field trip teacher. I took 9 field trips a year, because we know the children in urban communities, they don't get out of their cities. They don't go to the zoo and things like that. And I use a lot of the Lakeshore Dunes. Well, at the time, there was a big transportation fund. So I could go to Shelburne Farm. I could go to Mount Baldy. I could go to the Douglas Center. I could do all of that with my children at no cost, because it was, those attractions were free, and there was money in the transportation fund. Now our transportation fund is being used to transport our children from school to school to school. So as a teacher, the funds are not there. If I was going to take my children to Lincoln Park Zoo and the zoo is free, I would have to charge them $7 just to ride on the bus, knowing that the trip is free. So my point is, resources make a difference. Revenues make a difference. At the last DUAB meeting, the DUAB board, you know, we had someone on the board talked about the city that he lives in, Carmel, Indiana, where they raised a $85 million referendum. And so we know that the children need the money. We're all supporting the referendum. I had one more thing to say. So that's it. We need to support the referendum. You know, my number is posted at the Gary Teachers Union. If anybody have questions, you can call me. I'm as transparent as it come. You know, I know we have problems with MGT. Of course, the union has problems with MGT as well, but MGT did not ask to come here. You know, the situation that we were in, what Senator Melton talked about, was real, where they were trying to split up our school corporation. And I know for a fact when families move to a city, they don't ask how many charters you have. They ask you, what is your public school system like? So as citizens of this community, we're trying to build Gary. Our new theme is Reimagine Gary. You can't reimagine it without a school corporation. So like I said, I'm available to answer questions about the teachers, how we feel about it, how we're working on the referendum. And again, thanks, Councilman Gott, for having this forum.
Thank you, President Dunham. If you want to post your number in the chat box, I'm sure there's a lot of residents who would love to hear a teacher's perspective. Senator Melton wanted to have a closing comment. He has to leave. We're going to go for another 10 minutes. So Senator Melton.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Leneva hit on what I was going to say. One of the primary reasons that I wanted to support the referendum, Indiana has one of the lowest and slowest salary growth for teachers in the entire nation. And that's the entire state. And on top of looking at Gary School Corporation, and we look at teachers not getting any increase over the last decade, I thought it was time for us to help and support them. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to reiterate, but I think she hit that very eloquently. Another example I want to show of when a community comes together and work on legislation. Some may be aware of the legislation that we've passed this year. The language that I was able to craft to ensure that we get the funds rediverted from the loans that we were paying and defer that into improvements to our schools, from roofs to boilers and to the critical infrastructure, but also for demolition. And it was the information that I reached out to, I know we're in the 1st District, but Mr. Rogie, I want to thank him for sharing data and sharing information when it came to schools like Nobel, where I was able to provide that data to key legislators, show those images and pictures to show why is it so important that we need to demolish some of these school structures because there's a public safety and hazard. So I use that as an example to say we're approaching quickly to 2021 legislative session. And as we have our town halls, Representative Smith, myself, Representative Hatcher, Representative Earl Harris, and Senator Lonnie Randolph, please stay engaged with us throughout the session. If you have ideas on legislation, let us know. Reach out to us. And we want to work collaboratively with our communities to ensure that we're representing and being a voice for you all downstate. So with that, I apologize. I actually getting on the road tonight to be in the morning in Indianapolis for a committee meeting, but I just want to say thanks again for everyone being engaged. And if there's any questions that I can have, please don't hesitate to reach out. So thanks again, Councilman Godwin.
Thank you, Senator Melton. I wanted to give Dr. McNulty an opportunity. I think she wants to respond to something, but also in the chat box here, there's conversations about the debt. I know I've read some stuff on Nextdoor in different places that this money is going to be used to pay for debt and so forth. What are the implications of the debt if this referendum does pass or if it doesn't pass? And of course, it looks like you had something else you wanted to add, Dr. McNulty.
Yes, so I just wanted to quickly piggyback on what Senator Melton had said and to say that in case people weren't aware, there is a huge teacher shortage area happening in the state of Indiana. And so school districts are in competition with each other to hire teachers. Colleges are not graduating the rates of teachers as they used to. So when I went to college and got out of college and became a teacher, it was customary that you signed a teacher contract and you stayed there for the entire school year. That does not happen anymore. Teachers might sign a contract and 3 weeks later they get a better offer and they bounce to the next school district. So we are all stealing from each other. And so I can tell you at this point in time last year, the Gary Community Schools had 45 teaching openings. Which is not good. And it's very difficult to raise scores and raise academics if you can't recruit and then retain those teachers. And so that's another reason why this is imperative for us to be able to pay our teachers and be able to get them to stay with us once they're here. So as you might have heard, we've partnered with IUN University so that we can start a cohort, which we did, and we've got nearly all those positions filled. I think we're down to 3. So that those teachers can get their teaching credentialing finished and then stay with us for a 3-year commitment beyond that. So we are building those bases for that to happen. But I wanted to make sure I said that because there is a huge teaching shortage area.
Let me just quickly say there's comments here about the cost to the first district, which is not just Lakeshore Drive in terms of the averages that you're using. It's Etna, it's Glen Ryan, it's Emerson, and much of Miller, where we recognize that we have a lot of $1 million homes. We have a lot of $500,000 homes. But that's certainly not the majority of the first district or the city of Gary. And so you're using a number, I think you're saying $60,000. And of course, that's frustrating to a lot of folks because they know their assessed valuation is more than $60,000. But I think, again, putting out the tax calculator is very important. If folks have not seen it, again, it shows you exactly what it will cost you. And I understand the decision that people have to make, whether they want to spend an additional $2,000 or $1,000 if they have a higher priced home. But I don't think it's necessarily disingenuous to suggest that everybody's going to be paying $2,000, $3,000. When we look at homes outside of what the assessor calls Lake Shore and Lake View, the average home price is probably closer to $120,000 in terms of assessed valuation, not the $500,000, $700,000. But I'm not insensitive to that. And I understand why some people are concerned about the financial impact it will have. But I encourage everyone to look at the tax calculator to see what it will cost you. There were 2 questions here about what the school district has done in terms of the art that it had, as well as uncollected book rentals, and whether there's been any effort to do anything about that. And I also wanted to make sure we got clarity on the debt conversation in terms of what happens with the debt if the referendum passes or doesn't pass. What's our plan to deal with the debt?
So for the art question, I'll start with that. I'm not sure. I think that was several years ago. I do believe some of the art was sold, but I'd have to get a listing of what was actually sold and what those prices were. And I can certainly do that and post that for you tomorrow. Your other question was, I'm sorry.
About the book, I think someone said book collections, book rentals.
Collection. Thank you. So we are 99% free and reduced district, so we don't collect book rental because our students are on free and reduced lunch. So that's not something that we collect. I also want to clarify again that the total debt, can you hear me? Because you're frozen. You can hear me? Okay, the total debt has gone from 104 million down to 79, and that's our total debt. And the annual deficit has gone from 22 million down to 6. If this referendum passes, again, that's the quickest path towards MGT exiting and getting the balanced budget, and for MGT to exit and for us to go back to local control. None of the money is going to MGT, not one penny goes to MGT or myself. If it doesn't pass, then we will be looking at a longer path. We'll be looking at consolidating schools. We'll be looking at not adding those enhancements that I talked about, not having added curriculum after school activities. All those things would not happen.
All right, sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty. I wanted to give Dr. McNulty as well as Representative Smith an opportunity. I know there's been some chat box conversations going on, but maybe I'll start with Representative Smith in terms of the charter school issue and the academic performance issue. If you wanted to offer any responses to some of the conversations happening in the chat, and then Dr. McNulty can close us out.
Mr. Gower, my students have been moving as fast as these young people who send these texts out. I'm always amazed how fast their fingers move. Well, mine have been moving fast, responding to the chat box here, trying to respond to everybody who has said anything that's pertinent to my knowledge base. Charter schools have not performed as well as the traditional public schools. The charter schools in Gary, with the exception of one, is performing lower than the Gary Community School Corporation. That's a fact. The data is there to prove it. And so, the charter schools were supposed to be the panacea, the cure-all. They were supposed to be the miracle, and supposedly the whole thought behind it was that we would isolate those things that the charter schools were doing that were successful. We would take those things and we would emulate them and use them throughout the traditional public schools. That has never occurred. And the reason why is because they talk about the dance of the lemons. Well, they have practiced the dance of the lemons with perfection, much better than any of the public schools. Mm-hmm. Dance of the lemons concept is that they move teachers from one school to another. Look at the transit record of the schools, the charter schools and their teachers. They don't stay there. They can up and move in the middle of the year. Many of them don't have contracts and they walk off because of culture shock. They're gone in a month. They're gone in 2 weeks. They're gone in a day. They can't take it. And so the charter schools have not performed. The question is what are we using research for? Research is showing us how we effectively educate children of poverty. If you look at the effective schools research, and if you just use those correlates and infuse them into what's happening in your schools, you're going to have success in your buildings. But one of the things I asked charter schools, one of the things I asked when I was a principal of a traditional public school, what are you doing different in special education classrooms? What are you doing differently in charter schools? What are you doing differently in the private schools that are taking the public vouchers? The answer is nothing. And so we're getting the same. If you put the same ingredients in, you're going to get the same product out of it. And so I'm telling you, and one thing that disturbs me See, Gary gave me a good education. I wasn't the brightest student. And the reason I support this referendum is because I don't operate under the Clarence Thomas principle. I'm gonna cross the bridge and I'm gonna pull up the bridge and nobody else gonna come across. I want every child in Gary to have the quality of education that the Gary Community School Corporation gave me. And I'm telling you, with the charter schools, we're not getting it. Is there work to be done with the Gary Community School Corporation? Yes, and definitely yes. But I'm telling you, the answer is not charter school or public school. It's what you do in the school that makes a difference.
Thank you, Representative Smith. I wanted to give Dr. McNulty the last word and ask that she specifically address the issue of accountability. She's already mentioned it, but just to double down on the oversight, the financial oversight that exists now that did not exist in the past, the accountability of MGT as well as the school corporation to the city, to the residents in terms of performance and in terms of fiscal accountability. So if we could end on that note, I just want to remind everyone that we will have another conversation. And I'm hopeful that during that conversation, we can share the screen and perhaps Dr. McNulty or others can go through the tax calculator, go through the impact and have some charts and data and some images about how exactly these dollars will be used, just to kind of give people a visual and something that's tangible that we all can hold on to as we make the decision about how we will vote in November. So Dr. McNulty, thank you. Thank Representative Smith, Senator Melton, and our teacher of all teachers, Mrs. Gleneva Dunham, for her passionate advocacy on behalf of teachers and students in the city of Gary. I wanted to give Dr. McNulty an opportunity to conclude and to talk about what's at stake and to hopefully give some insight and to assuage some of the concerns and fears. Thank you, everyone. Dr. McNulty.
Thank you again for hosting. And what's at stake is the children, to be honest with you. What's at stake is the children. And we're trying to grow the children so that they can be good community members and pipelines into working jobs, going to college, and be able to give back to their community. So we got to continue to grow and foster our children so that they are able to do that once they graduate from high school. But with that being said, I would like to say that I think that MGT and myself, that we have done a very good job in trying to be partners and working harder to be partners with the community and with the stakeholders. And I appreciate my partnership with Ms. Dunham. I think she and I are working very well together on behalf of the teachers and the students, and we're going to continue to do so. We're working very hard on increasing and raising the bar of what's expected of our teachers, what's expected of our students, and also educating our parents so that we know it's a partnership working with our parents, that they need to be invested in their students' education as well. And we started doing that this summer diligently with the passing out of those Chromebooks and the hotspots and doing professional development with our teachers and the parents as to what to expect. We've invested already into enhancing our CTE programming so that students have many more pathways to explore and options so that they leave high school with a certificate that's paid for so that they can leave with a good paying job. So we are already investing and we need the funds to continue to invest in our students. As far as accountability, our feet are definitely being held to the fire, and they should be, absolutely. So the state is watching us. Again, the governor's office is watching us. The community is watching us. And again, we're going to have the plan every quarter to be able to share with everybody as far as how we're doing with the grades, fiscally, operationally, and with communication. We invite people from the community to join those committees that are posted on our website so that you can have these conversations with us. We want to be able to hear from everybody your concerns, your input, so that we can tweak things as we go forward, because this has to be a community investment, absolutely. And so I guess I would want to close by saying we are absolutely committed to serving our students. We want them to be able to be competitive with our neighboring districts. I encourage everyone to remember that a strong school equals a strong community. And so I appreciate you listening with open ears tonight so that we can make a mindful decision on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McNulty, and thank you to all the residents of the 1st District and all the panelists who are participating tonight. Again, please look out for another session in early October. Also, there was a lot of documents and research and resources that were mentioned. I'll be working with Dr. McNulty as well as her team and Ms. Chelsea Whittington to get all of that material. And we'll try to have as many images and tables as possible so that residents are informed and have all the facts when they make their decision, when we make our decision about the referendum. Again, thanks to everyone for participating. This will be on our Facebook, the Gary Common Council page. So if you don't follow the Gary Common Council, please do so. You can see a lot of videos and information with what our activities are. Also, you can go to the Gary Community School Corporation's Facebook page. They have a website, as well as the VoteYesGarySchools.com, which has additional information that you can see. And again, we're going to package all the information in advance of our next meeting. And some of the questions that were not able to be asked, we will ask those at that time. Again, thanks to everyone, especially our panelists. Please have a good evening, and I look forward to our continued civil, respectful, mutually beneficial conversation about children and schools, not politics, but education. Thank you.